Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Trapping School podcast. I'm your host, Chris Pope. We're here. If your trapping season has already started, hope you're having a great season. If you're like a lot of us, especially here in the South, we've still got a little time, but it's a coming quick, man. It's hard to believe Christmas is right around the corner. The end of 2020 is right around the corner. We'll see what 2021 brings. Right, it's going to be interesting, I guess, to say the least. So, along the lines of interesting, before we get into that, got to thank our sponsor, Coyote Lures. All your trapping supply needs, hit them up. Go to coyote.com. Fast, quick shipping. They usually, anytime I've ordered stuff, usually it gets shipped out that day. So you always get it quick, which is always helpful, because especially this time of year, if you're ordering something, it's because you forgot it beforehand and you need it now. So for any supply needs or lure needs, hit Kaatz Bros, Kaatz, and they'll get you fixed up. So talking about along the lines of a kind of interesting, in a eyebrow raised kind of way, I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about meat trapping, so to speak. So we all know, if you're listening to this, you're not in trapping for the money to begin with, right? Because there is no money in trapping unless you're selling trapping supplies. and as somebody who has tried that, even then, there may not be a lot of money in it. But you know, we've got our hands on a resource that's, you know, in this world and this craze of not necessarily a craze, I guess, but organic and all the kind of green buzzwords. You know, we're processing and got our hands on a lot of stuff that meets all those criteria outside of the one criteria of it's kind of weird, right? And so, yeah, I thought we'd talk a little bit about that because as a trapper, if you've never tried any furbearer meat, I'm sure you've thought about it. And a lot of you probably have before. And so I guess for starters, why not, right? You know, we know how this meat's handled for a lot of us. You know, we're getting some of our other meat, like my family, you know, I try to kill at least 2 deer a year. And that's mainly what we eat on throughout the year. We'll buy some chicken and pork if I'm not catching. I've been catching plenty of hogs lately, so I hadn't been buying a lot of that. But may buy beef steak every once in a while. But especially as far as ground meat, we're eating deer, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. I know we all do, and that's one of the reasons we are doing what we're doing is the satisfaction we get of being out there and not living off the land, but you know, getting that enjoyment from the land and knowing where things come from and that kind of thing. So I thought I'd hit on a few things. So I have experimented probably more so than a lot of folks with kind of eating some of this furbearer meat, and I made some videos and some recipes on it, and so I think it's something. One, it's something that a lot of antis, but also non-trappers. There's a lot of folks that are okay with you killing stuff as long as you use it. And from the trapping standpoint, you know, we may be using the fur, but we're making money off the fur. At least that's what everybody thinks. So that's not really using it, and you know, we're kind of letting the meat go to waste, so to speak. And so I think that's one avenue, one opportunity that we might be able to kind of sway people if we've at least said, oh yeah, you know, I made beaver burgers last year, whatever, you know, just something that you know, might in you know, the odd person that actually brings up the subject might sway them a little bit more on our side of the fence versus the other. If, you know, we can point to at least one time when we've, used or tried this or that. So, you know, and that's realistically, we talk about it a pretty good bit on here, is You know, that's an ongoing battle with the antis and public perception in general of trapping. So, I just kind of jotted down a list. Now, some stuff, you're more of a man than I am, maybe, and I hate to say that. I struggle to say that, but, you know, some stuff like skunk and otter, coyote, I've been on the fence about, you know, fox. I've been on the fence with that so far. I'm probably going to have to break down and try some coyote at some point, but, and I have cooked and eaten armadillo, so that's probably not any better than an otter or something like that, but honestly, the meat's not bad at all. But it's all in handling it and preparing it, and as much as that, it's in how you cook it. So I'll save my secret recipe that I think is a slam dunk for pretty much any meat. Now, I'm going to save that for the end. I'm going to tease that here and save that for the end for you. But so one of the obvious first is beaver, right? You know, beaver's a big animal, relatively, you know, compared to the other fur bearers. So, you know, you look at a beaver hind quarter. I mean, that's a good size, you know, a roast size piece of meat on a good big beaver. And so that's an appeal. It's kind of a darker meat to me. It kind of reminds me of like a deer. And they got a back strap, not a spectacular size back strap. You know, they got a little back strap, and so I've fried the back strap. A lot of folks will talk about doing like a pot roast with beaver and putting your potatoes and carrots and whatnot in there, you know, with a hind quarter and letting it cook. One thing, and I've got a grinder, but it's kind of a hassle, honestly, to get out, and that's just an excuse, I know, but I think doing something like beaver burger, one thing I do even with my deer meat is there, you know, I'll take a set aside portion of it and mix in. You buy those bags of the packages of bacon ends and trimmings, and I'll mix in. So I may do 10 pounds of meat total. I'll mix. I think those come in 3 pound packs, maybe 2.5, 3 pound packs, and I'll mix in 7 pounds of venison with 3 pounds of that bacon ends. And kind of make bacon burger, and it doesn't taste as much like bacon as you would expect, but you kind of get a little bit of that flavor throughout. It's not by any means the same as having slices of bacon on there, but it's pretty good. And so I think, especially, you know, it adds a little bit of fat to the mixture. So I think that'd probably be a win, and probably you could get anybody on board with eating some beaver burger, especially if you had it mixed with a little bacon. But even some sausage, I think, is something that, and like I said, my grinder, I bought a 1 horsepower. It's been years ago, and I had an uncle that had kind of a smaller, one of the kind of $100 Bass Pro grinders, and it just, everything got clogged in it. It was not, it was more hassle than it was worth using, and so I, having nothing else to compare it to, I said, well, I'm going to go on the far end of the spectrum, and Cabela's was running a sale, and I had some Cabela's points, and so I bought one of their 1 horsepower grinders, and man, it's way overpowered for what I need. It'll grind, it'll grind anything faster than I can keep it fed, and so that's just an excuse for me. But you know, it's always, I need to just get to the point of saving a couple of beaver hindquarters, and you know, because I'll grind some, when I get some deer, I'll grind some deer. I try to do it all together, so that's what I need to do, because I think it like so many other things, it's not going to be bad, especially if you make some summer sausage or something like that. It's going to be, most likely, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference. I will say I've seen some folks comment about it tasting like castor, or you know, bigger beavers kind of tasting like castor. And I haven't had that issue. Not that I've eaten a ton of beaver, but I've cooked it a few different ways. And the one thing I would say is, to me, all of that stuff comes out in your skinning and in your cleaning. So, you know, if you nick the castor gland or an oil sac or something like that, that's stuff you got to be really careful with. And glands in general, so especially next I was going to talk about raccoons, but you know, in general, any kind of wild game, I try to pull out the glands whenever possible. And you know, there's glands underneath kind of the armpit area. They're in the back, you know, the back leg, kind of that hawk area. And a lot of times, it's easier to see on bigger animals. But if you're cutting into any kind of meat and you see a little pocket of fat, it's worth looking at to make sure there's not a gland in there. Especially some of these, you know, like raccoon. That's one thing that folks that are eating raccoons, they talk about demusking it and getting the musk glands out. So with any wild game, I would recommend really paying attention to those glands. And of course, beaver or pretty much anything, if you throw it in a crock pot and cook it till it's pull off the bone tender, and you shred it up and mix it with barbecue sauce, I mean, anything, you know, you're not going to taste anything with the barbecue sauce. So anything works like that. And that's one thing that I've done before is take like a beaver hind quarter, do just like that. Cook it in a crock pot till it's shreddable, just super tender. And then I may shred it, and I may do part of it. I don't know about y'all, but they got the Hawaiian roll, the King's Hawaiian roll sliders, the little bitty sliders. I mean, they're those kind of sweet buns, and that's what I usually do. Is I'll shred that beaver meat and mix some barbecue sauce in it and put it on one of those slider rolls, and man, that's pretty good. But what I'll also do is, before I mix the barbecue sauce with it, I'll kind of separate it out and make, you know, you've got enough there to make really two meals. So I make tacos on one side, and you know, mix some taco seasoning in with it, maybe mix some peppers and onions and stuff like that in with it. And so you got your tacos on one side that's got seasoning on them. You got your barbecue on the other side. It's got barbecue sauce mixed in. So that's a pretty good, to me, that's a pretty good kind of combination there, because you know, if you cook a whole hind quarter and it's just a few of you eating, or a couple of you, or just you because nobody else in your house will eat it, you know, barbecue after so many days might get a little bit old. Of course, you can always freeze it or whatever, but you know, just cooking it till it's tender, shredding it, and then doing some different things with it, I found to be a good option. Next up, raccoon. It's kind of a darker meat too, and can be real fatty. Not a whole lot of meat unless you get a really big raccoon. Now, my buddy in North Dakota, I mean, he catches some coons that are bigger than a 5-gallon bucket. I ain't seen anything. I mean, that's bigger than our coyotes down here. Yeah, we got some dinky little old coons. But a lot of guys, if you listen to anybody, and there's a lot of folks that have tried it one time or had a buddy that cooked it or whatever. So I always take that with a grain of salt. But some folks you'll hear talk about parboiling before you cook it. And then a lot of folks will also do, you know, so they may parboil it and then grill it and smother it in barbecue sauce, or do it a roast style again with sweet potatoes or potatoes and carrots and onions and things like that, and do it like a roast. You're not going to get you're going to have, one thing that I've kind of keyed in on or figured out is you got to have somebody that's prepared and not turned off by eating, especially with bones, because you know, with raccoon you're not going to have as much meat. With a beaver, you get a good beaver hind quarter and you can kind of bone it out, and you know, you can have a nice big hunk of meat that doesn't have bones. But you're not really going to do that with a raccoon so much. You can, and have some smaller pieces, but I say that because that's not that my wife would eat raccoon anyway, but you know, just thinking about your audience, I guess you could say. One thing that I have done with raccoon, I didn't parboil it, but this is one of my recipes that would work for pretty much any of these animals. Is I made egg rolls. So I took it and I just, you know, cut a piece off the bone of a hind quarter, and took it and cut it up, kind of chopped it real thin, and sliced it real thin and fine, and went ahead and cooked it, and then took that meat and mixed it in with some cabbage. I can't remember. I think I just mainly mixed it in with like some shredded cabbage, and then took egg roll wraps and wrapped it up in an egg roll wrap and fried it, and then you eat your duck sauce or soy sauce or whatever on it. When it's cooked like that, you don't really taste whatever the meat is, you know. So that's a good way. And that's something to me that's something easy you can do and kind of get some other people, as long as they're on board with trying some wild game, you know, kind of introduce somebody to something like that. And it's not a big, you know, big strong piece of meat. It's small and mild and mixed with other stuff, and everybody likes to be able to talk about what they've eaten, right? So, you know, letting somebody have a raccoon egg roll, and then they go to work the next Monday and tell everybody about the raccoon egg roll that they ate at some hillbillies, one of their hillbilly trapper friends' house. You know, that can go a long way and spread a lot of word, spread a lot of goodwill for trappers. So another, in line with the raccoon, you got possum. Now, I can honestly say that I've never eaten possum before. That being said, according to my uncle and my grandmother, my great-grandparents would pretty regularly eat possum. What they would do was they would catch a possum and they would feed it grain, corn, whatever for a few days to a week or so to clean it out. And then once they did that, they would cook it and eat it. And in all fairness, you skin a possum, it's a pretty white meat. I mean, if you could get by the ugliness and stink of it being a possum, it looks like it would probably be some good meat. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there soon, but it's a possum. So, you want to try it? There's no doubt in my mind if you made possum egg rolls, they would be delicious and nobody would ever know. Lastly, in talking about white meat, bobcat. So, bobcat's kind of the same as possum. It's a nice white, you know, porky looking meat. So I've actually got a bobcat hindquarter in the freezer that I need to do something with. Speaking of which, circle back around to the beaver. I can't remember. I think it's pastrami that I made. I think I did a YouTube video on it. Maybe not. Anyway, I think I made beaver pastrami. It's something where you smoke it and then you almost steam it. There's a couple of steps, but it's rubbed in a really heavy peppery outer layer and then sliced. That actually turned out pretty darn good. Now, there was so much pepper and stuff rubbed on the outside, like you couldn't hardly taste anything else but that. You know, but that's a common, you know, thing to do with. I don't even know if that's usually pork or beef. But anyway, something that turned out pretty good. So I got sidetracked there. But getting back around to the bobcat, I've got a hindquarter that I'm trying to think about a way to do something with. Depending on the bobcat, they can have a halfway decent sized backstrap, and that's what I've done before. And my best recipe, and I would recommend with any fur bearer, you make sure it's cooked well done. Just, you know, I'm hoping to actually, in one of the interviews that I'm getting lined up, hoping to interview a disease biologist and kind of talk about some of the potential threats and issues that, you know, handling and dealing with fur bearers and directly dealing with blood and things like that could pose for us. But, you know, because maybe fur bearers are a little bit elevated risk, I would suggest making sure that everything you cook's well done, which, you know, either cooking something low and slow and long, like a beaver in a crock pot, or dicing things up like for the egg rolls. I think that's a safe bet. But my bobcat, so my secret recipe, so to speak, I did this with bobcat. Actually, we always have a big family Christmas dinner, and my family, the men in my family are pretty adventurous as far as what they're willing to eat. So I think even my grandmother actually ate some. She's pretty adventurous too. So, but I made some bobcat Philly rolls and took them and cooked them there, and everybody that wanted one tried one, and they got pretty rave reviews for being bobcat. In fact, nobody would have ever guessed that it was bobcat. It's super mild meat. But all I did, kind of with the same with the egg rolls, is I used the back strap and I kind of sliced it up real fine, sauteed it with some onions and garlic and pepper, and then took a roll of crescent rolls and kind of laid it out and mashed it down and kind of filled the inside with that meat mixture already cooked, the meat, onions, and everything. Sprinkled some cheese on top and then rolled it up. And then I don't think I rolled them like a traditional roll because I was trying to kind of get it all wrapped around. But you had the kind of the sweetness of the crescent roll, and then if you'll notice, I kind of like sweet things, but the sweetness of the crescent roll, and then in general just the peppers and onions and cheese, and I probably threw in a little bit of Cavender's or something like that seasoning. And man, I'm telling you, like there isn't anybody that you would come in contact with that wouldn't think that was delicious. And that's one. I can't remember if I did that with raccoon or not. I know I did. I know I did that with bobcat. That's how I cooked the armadillo. Again, you'd have never known it. That's one that any wild game, if you're having some folks over, in my opinion, it's a great way to kind of introduce people, get the ball rolling, and do it in a way, handing people a hunk of fried meat, especially wild game meat. Maybe it's tender, maybe it's not, maybe it's chewy, maybe it's strong. But if you take that meat and kind of slice it small, mix it with some other good tasting stuff, and then present it in a way like that, it's almost hard for somebody to have a negative reaction. I run into so many people, even here in the South, that I don't like deer meat. It's strong. It's got a strong flavor, whatever. And man, my wife eats deer meat, and she would have told you before we got married that she didn't eat deer meat, right? It's all in how you handle it. One thing that I think could make a difference. I'm listening. I think Meat Eater podcast they talked about before, and something that a lot of times I'll do, just because of the heat and all down here in the South. But letting your meat kind of bleed out in a cooler with ice, and draining the water off. I think that probably the Meat Eater guys talk about it kind of ruining the flavor, removing a lot of the meat flavor. But in a situation like this with beaver or something like that, especially if you want to have some people try it and never tried anything, it might not be a bad way to kind of get some of the blood and maybe a little bit of that taste out. And everybody's got their own kind of homegrown, soaking in buttermilk, soaking in salt water, whatever. And I don't know that overnight it would do a lot. Maybe on a small beaver hindquarter that's been boned out. But and you can definitely tell the difference, in a hindquarter that's been, you pull out of ice water versus, a hindquarter that's never been soaked. I mean, that ice water, the meat loses its pretty red color when you do that. So anyway, that's just a thought. Maybe this will encourage you, be just what you needed to give some kind of wild game, some kind of furbearer a try this year that you've been thinking about. One thing that I think I'm going to have to try is cooking some beaver tail. So I made, I skinned a bunch of beaver tails for my beaver tail wallets and for having stuff tanned. And year before last, I put a bunch of those skin tails in a crock pot, trying to make some beaver tail oil without the rendering process. And man, I kind of like a little bit of fatty meat anyway, But when I opened that, I didn't season it or anything. When I opened that and was pulling the tails out, and man, it smelled good. It was all I could do because I hadn't, washed or paid any attention to trying to keep the tails clean. So I didn't really feel comfortable eating one, but I dang sure kind of wanted to. So I may have to try that as a kind of a furthering wild game, my furbearer recipe repertoire. Try cooking some beaver tail and seeing how that does. But it's there ain't much meat. It's all gristle. But some people like that. Some people don't. I tend to like that. So maybe I'll include that in one of my videos this winter. So anyhow, that wraps it up. That's all I got to say. If you've never tried any fur bear, I would say beaver or bobcat would be a good starting point. If you're a little bit reserved about it, do like I said, get you a package of crescent rolls. Take you probably don't even need but a quarter of an onion and some bell pepper. Dice it all up. Dice up a little bit of your meat. Saute it in a pan. Put a little olive oil or something in there and get it all good. And then pat it. Roll your cinnamon rolls out. Put your meat in there. Sprinkle a little cheese. Roll it up. Stick it in the oven. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So with that, I'm gonna leave it with y'all. Happy trapping. We'll catch you next time.